Hello and welcome to day 3 of my week of Natasha Denona. Today we're going in with the gold palette on oldie but a goodie. Again, we're going to do this chatty get ready with me style, so I'm just going to do my makeup while chatting with you. I figured out something very important. I'm going to start applying my eyeshadow primer whilst we're doing that. I know why the Yucca palette is not as attractive to me as I thought it would be. So, as you guys know, Natasha Denona is releasing new palette. By the time you see this video, the palette will probably be out. It is called the Yucca palette, and it is a little bit of like a mustardy green with some interesting metallics in there. And that is exactly the problem, the metallics. There are only a few of them. Out of the 15 shades, I think I counted it this morning, and if I remember correctly, out of the 15 shades in that palette, only 5 are metallics. Everything else are mattes. And I am not usually one to be highly attracted by eyeshadow palettes which contain more mattes than more metallics, because mattes are not what gets my motor running. Mattes are not the reason I buy eyeshadow palettes for, and especially expensive eyeshadow palettes. I think solid matte eyeshadows, great, fantastic. You know, I am happy to have good quality mattes from my favorite brands, but not when the mattes are going to be the overwhelming amount of eyeshadows in a palette. And that is exactly what's going on with the Yucca palette. And not only that, before I forget, I'm going to pop on a little bit of my Auric Glow Lust. And not only that, but the mattes in that palette, for whatever reason, look like they will be a lot of them look very similar to each other. There is like a mustardy green and a mustardy yellow, which on the swatch at least look different enough, but I wonder if on the face they are actually going to look different enough, because I am not convinced of that. Then there's this random like lime green type shade, the type of shade that they threw in the Anastasia Beverly Hills, what was it? Oh, this really old holiday palette that had a bunch of colors and a random lime green in there. It reminds me a little bit of that, although, you know, in this specific palette the lime green makes somewhat more sense, but I still don't like it. I'm going to take the Dior Backstage foundation. So I figured out that overall there are actually a few reasons that I'm not really attracted to this palette. So now I am quite unsure whether I will be picking it up. I'm just a little bit unconvinced that I'm going to be super excited about this palette. I will see once the reviews start coming out how special the metallics are, because that's really the biggest question. We're getting only 5 of them. They better be mind-blowing if I'm going to have any interest in this palette. And knowing Natasha Denona, I don't know that mind-blowing, interesting metallics really are her forte. I feel like Natasha Denona's forte really is like the more monochromatic stories. Everything else she has ever put out that is a little bit more colorful has seemed all over the place, and it has gotten a bit more mixed reviews, like that Cirque du Soleil or the Circus something Circus palette. Circle Loco. Then we have the Zendo. None of them really went down as favorites. Is it maybe too early for me to try this concealer again, or should I give it... You know what? I'm going to give it a try. I'm going to do the Lancome Tainted Doll Concealer in the shade... in the shade 01, which is usually a little bit too dark for me, but I have been in the sun the last few days, so I wonder whether at the very least it won't blend with the rest of my skin, so I'm going to try it. Because I actually do like this formula. I like this better than the Huda concealer. I just took a few pictures of the Huda concealer and I'm going to try to sell it, because I cannot make fetch happen with that concealer. I just don't like it. I don't like it at all on its own, even if it was the correct shade. I don't like it mixed in with other foundations. It just makes the other foundations appear so much drier and cakier on my under eyes. I just don't like it. Okay, this is not really brightening my under eyes, but it is also not really doing anything negative to my under eyes. So I far prefer this formulation. And in my search for another holy grail concealer, I've actually ordered the Dior Forever Skin, whatever it's called, concealer, the Dior Forever Skin, based on a recommendation of Charlotte Holdcroft. Charlotte Holdcroft has been someone who really enables me to buy things the past year or so. I'm also going to grab the corresponding powder, and I have the feeling that out of other people that I enjoy's recommendations on YouTube, Charlotte's are the ones that usually work out for me. Like the lash growth serum was totally her idea. And I have bought other things based off her recommendations, and I haven't really regretted them. And she ranks the Huda concealer and the Pat McGrath concealer pretty highly, but she also ranks this Dior concealer very highly, and she does specify that it is an entirely different formula, that it is much more of a hydrating formula. So I have swatched that concealer in store, and it seems to be a very hydrating one, so I'm gonna give it a try, and I can hopefully get rid of the Huda concealer. I'm going to put the Too Faced Laminating Brow Wax. I found out that regardless of when I apply this product, it just always kind of ends up creating these like this white film, this dry white film on my brows. So what I think I'm going to try next is, first of all, continue to apply it after I've applied my base products, and second of all, I'm going to try to comb out a little bit of the excess of the gel that stays behind, because that dries down and becomes white, crusty and disgusting. So I'm going to try now to comb it out as much as possible using a little spoolie here that I have from an old L'Oreal Brow Artist Plumper. But anyway, I want to go back to talking about Natasha Denona's palette, because I don't want you to get the impression that I think her eyeshadow color stories are not good or anything. I actually applaud Natasha Denona for being one of the few who takes risks with her color stories. I think that her color stories are quite interesting because she goes sometimes very monochromatic, so it's like a very cohesive color story, and yes, there's a lot of repetition in her monochromatic color stories, but overall they just really work. Let me stop rambling for just a bit to pick out a bronzer for today. Let's go in with the Chanel Soleil Tan de Chanel. This is like the oldest version of this bronzer. At this point they've released like, I think, other versions of it, and recently they released like a mini version. I don't know, I haven't really kept so much track, but just so you know, I have the oldest version of that bronzer. And while I may not be the biggest fan of her, you know, more mixed color stories such as Zendo or Circo Loco or the Midi Retro or whatever it is, I still can appreciate them, and I can still respect the fact that she's taking more risks with her color stories. And again, that Yucca palette, it's a really interesting palette, and a palette that I feel like people in the makeup community have been asking for. Something that's a little bit more like murky, mustardy, you know, swampy, green, yellow. And she's giving us that. I like that. I like that she's listening, and I like that she's taking risks with her palettes. For my blush today, I'm going to take the Victoria Beckham Cheeky Posh in the shade Playground, which is a really beautiful, like, sort of like brownish cinnamon type color. And because the stick on this is quite tiny, and if I go in with my brush, I'm always afraid that I'm going to break it, I'm just going to apply a little bit on the back of my hand, like so. And then I'm going to take the same synthetic fluffy brush on which I had the bronzer, and just take a little bit of that and apply that here onto my cheeks. This is a really beautiful color. I was not super impressed with it when I bought it, but the more I have used it, the more I have come to really appreciate the formula and the color and just everything about this blush. This is another win for me from the Victoria Beckham line. I've liked everything besides the lipstick. The lipstick I've worn twice, once for the demo video and once out and about for work, and it made the disgusting crusty line, and since then it's been in my drawer. I should probably put that up for sale as well. For highlighter, I'm going to take this Suku 101 Melting Powder Highlighter, which was a limited edition summer release for last year. And finally, I'm going to set everything with a little bit of Fix Plus on my sponge here. Oh, that Fix Plus is on its last legs. I've done actually quite a few looks on my channel with this palette. I have recollections of having used this shade, and this shade all over my lid, maybe even something with like the browns and this topper here. So I'm actually thinking that today I would like to go back to using this beautiful flaky shade, which is arguably the most interesting shade in this palette because it is flaky, it is duochromatic, it is sparkly. With that said, I think this is one of Natasha's best palettes, if not her best palette to date, because of the different textures that it contains. There are some good old mattes, some grand old metallics, but she also has these two shades here, which are that wet, very like interesting feeling toppery type shades, and you have this one which is the flakier duochrome, and this one which is a bit of a smoother duochrome. It reminds me a little bit of VR Fire Opal from Pat McGrath Labs, but without being baked, so far less interesting in terms of texture, but still a really beautiful eyeshadow. So overall, the gold palette remains a masterpiece in her collection, and from what I understand, it has actually recently come back in stock, because I've heard a few people who didn't manage to get this palette before, when it was first released, are getting it now, so it's been making a comeback. Anyway, enough with the rambling. I'm going to go in with this mustardy brownie shade over here to apply mainly through my crease, but I think I'm just going to apply it all over my lid, and then I'm going to apply this one all over my lid over a glitter glue, so it's going to be a relatively simple look. And then I'm thinking a little bit about putting this one in my inner corners because it is such a beautiful gold, and then keeping it easy on the lower lashes, probably just going to go back into the mustardy shade. I'm going to take a fluffy blending brush and start applying that mustardy shade basically all over the place. Altogether, you can find quite a few looks that I've done with this palette. I haven't demoed all of them because I think the very first video that I did with this palette was a Project 5 Wears. Project 5 Wears is a really old series that I used to do on my channel back in I want to say 18. It was the absolute perfect, you know, little series to do on my channel once I became a new mom, because it was a way for me to still showcase a lot of looks without really having to demo them, so they were much easier to film. So obviously time was a bit of a commodity at the time, but I think the Project 5 Wears series really pulled me through. Basically, it was a series where I would record the final result of the look and told everyone how I achieved it without actually having to demo it on camera. And I'm pretty sure I have a Project 5 Wears with the gold palette. I did this series with the agreement, or like with the suggestion, that if anyone ever wants me to showcase how I achieved one of the looks, they could let me down in the comments below. But I have to say that series comes from a time when my channel had, I think, much less engagement in the comments, and much less people were also into Pat McGrath, for example. So I've done quite a few of those with my Pat McGrath palettes. I'm taking the NYX glitter glue now, by the way. But that series comes from a time when Pat McGrath was far less popular, like far less popular. So yeah, if you're ever looking for inspiration, at least to like get looks, you can always go back and see what I used to do back in the day. I think also my style of makeup was a little bit different at the time, so I think you will find that a lot of the looks are they just hit slightly different notes than the looks that I'm doing nowadays. I think I'm going to actually use that flaky shade just on my fingers. I'm going to pick it up like this. It is a beautiful, like I said, duochrome shade. It is really reflective, as you can tell. Absolutely beautiful. Taking the soft definer brush from Sonia G now and going into that gold shade in the smack middle of the gold palette, because I am going to apply it as an inner corner highlight. I love this shade. It is one of my favorite golds ever, period. Such a beautiful gold. Not the most brightening shade for my inner corners, but you know, it's an interesting look, so I'm going to keep it this way. Let's be experimental. Keeping it nice and simple on the lower lashes, just taking the same brush and running the mustard matte that I have all over my lid on my lower lashes. So, complete look together with the lipstick. I chose for a slightly grungier color. This is one of my H&M cream lipsticks. This one is in the shade Heyday, and I specifically chose for this shade because it has a little bit of those like almost like mustardy grungy tones, so I feel like it really fits the mustardy tone from the gold palette and the rest of my clothing. You can see where my appreciation for Natasha Denona's monochromatic color stories comes from, the fact that I really like to match things and keep things very tonally similar. I like contrast, but I also really like to keep it monochromatic. Anyway, I hope that you enjoyed this look. Let me know what you thought about it. As usual, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!